They said healing was too expensive, so I became the cost they couldn't ignore. In a sterile room, my son priced my life in silence and left me for ledger lines. But behind every broken woman is a reckoning, quiet, strategic, final. This isn't a story of forgiveness. It's a masterclass in inheritance, rewritten. 1. Beneath the fluorescent lights, word count, 1,300. The light in the consultation room was too bright, fluorescent, clinical, buzzing slightly, as if the ceiling was annoyed we'd all gathered here. It reflected harshly off the white tile and metal edges of the exam chair, casting long shadows that reached toward the corners like they had secrets to tell. I sat on the edge of the chair, back stiff, coat folded across my lap like armor. My fingers curled tightly around the hospital folder they'd handed me at check-in. It bore my name, neatly typed in bold black letters, Eleanor M. Whitmore. Beneath it, a barcode. Neat, efficient, almost like luggage. The doctor was still talking, words like procedure, invasive, cost-benefit analysis. I caught some of them, not all. My ears were ringing slightly. That tends to happen when the air in a room suddenly changes, when something toxic enters it, not in the air itself, but in the tone of someone you once held close. He's asking about options, the doctor said, voice crisp but not unkind. With the current trajectory, delaying surgery could pose long-term complications. Recovery might be slower, but it's certainly manageable. I'll go over the risks and benefits. Of course, it's your call. Then Gavin cut in. He was leaning back in the visitor's chair, legs crossed, suit perfectly pressed even though it was barely noon. His arms were folded, one ankle resting across his knee like a man in a boardroom, not a son beside his mother. "I don't see the point," he said flatly. "Let's not waste money on her." He said it so casually, like ordering a less expensive appetizer, like he was just doing the math. My breath didn't catch. My heart didn't skip. Those things only happen when you're surprised. I wasn't. Nicole didn't flinch either. She just shifted slightly in her seat beside him, legs crossed, arms folded, her fingernails pale pink and polished. She didn't look at me, not once. Her eyes stayed on the folder in the doctor's hands. Business. The doctor blinked. "I'm sorry?" Gavin clarified with a smile that wasn't one. "She's 70 next year. The recovery time. The risk. The cost. I mean, we should be realistic, right? She's had a good life. This might not be worth the strain." I looked down at my hands, still clenched around the folder. The edge had begun to crumple under the pressure. My knuckles were white. I couldn't feel them anymore. My hands used to hold him. When he had fevered brows and monster-shaped fears, when I was the only voice that could calm him, now that voice was too expensive to keep alive. I didn't say anything. Neither did the doctor for a moment. Then he cleared his throat, professionalism returning like a second skin. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's entirely your decision. We're here to support you regardless." I nodded once. The rest of the consult was a blur. A checklist, follow-ups, insurance codes, a signed waiver. I signed without hesitation, not because I understood everything, but because I understood enough. Nicole stood first, her heels clicking against the tile like punctuation. Gavin followed, not even offering to carry the folder. They murmured something to the doctor, something about scheduling. They said they'd be in touch. They didn't ask if I needed a ride. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt colder than the light overhead. I sat still for several minutes. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, because the break was old. He had only named it out loud. I walked slowly through the hallway toward the blood lab. The chairs along the walls were occupied by women with tired eyes, and men pretending not to be afraid. The smell of disinfectant and overcooked coffee drifted through the air. The nurse called my name, and I followed without speaking. She was young, early 20s maybe. Her name tag read Janine. Her voice was soft but efficient. As she tightened the band around my arm, she asked, "Are you okay with needles?" I nodded. She paused. "Your hand is shaking." "I'll survive," I said. Her eyes met mine briefly, hesitating at the word. After the blood draw, I sat in the waiting area with my coat in my lap. The folder was still bent, its corners soft and torn now. I smoothed it out gently, not to preserve it, but to busy my hands. On the wall across from me was a poster. Bright, cheerful, optimistic. "Your health is your future." I stared at it, a future that, apparently, was negotiable if you lived too long. When I stepped outside, the air felt brighter than the hospital light, but not warmer. The sun had climbed over the parking structure, casting hard angles across the pavement. I looked for Gavin's car, but it was already gone. A part of me wasn't sure why I looked. I took the bus home. It was slow, smelled like engine grease and old receipts. The woman beside me chewed gum loudly. Two teens across the aisle argued about a rapper I'd never heard of. But it was quiet inside me. That kind of quiet that comes after a truth finally lands. Gavin hadn't hurt me with his words. He'd hurt me with his certainty, his comfort in reducing me to a budget line, his confidence in assuming no one would push back. He'd hurt me because I realized I had made it that easy. That night, I made tea in my too-quiet kitchen. The cupboard still held wedding china I hadn't touched in years. I stared at the cup as steam rose from it, my reflection warped in the stainless steel of the kettle. I thought about Raymond, my late husband, how he used to say things like, "Don't overextend yourself. Comfort is enough." How he taught Gavin that women were to be cared for only so long as they weren't expensive. How I never corrected them. How I became fluent in permission and silence. That night, I took out an old notebook, one I hadn't touched in decades. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed, but my name was still there, scribbled on the first page in younger, rounder handwriting. Eleanor Margaret Whitmore. I picked up a pen and wrote only one sentence. "He thinks I'm done." I capped the pen, not quite smiling, but close. The waiting room hadn't changed in decades, just aged into a different kind of tired. The same scuffed linoleum floors, the same plastic plants collecting dust in the corner. A flickering overhead television played a rerun of The Price is Right, muted, the host gesturing enthusiastically to an invisible audience. I sat in the far corner, alone, coat draped over the back of the chair beside me. It had started to slide off, the sleeve pooling on the floor like a hand reaching out and being ignored. I didn't bother fixing it. No one else would either. Gavin hadn't even looked back as he left. He'd walked out with Nicole, both of them checking their phones before they hit the exit. I'd watched his back disappear into the hallway, straight, confident, unreachable. The receptionist had asked if I wanted to wait alone. I told her yes, but the truth was, no one had offered to stay. So I waited. The room buzzed faintly with the fluorescent lighting. A baby cried in the distance. Someone coughed behind a magazine rack. The seats around me were sparsely occupied. Two elderly women whispering in the corner, a middle-aged man tapping relentlessly on his phone, and a young mother with twin boys drawing on napkins with broken crayons. I looked at the boys and remembered. Gavin had loved coloring when he was that age. Not just with crayons, chalk, markers, anything he could smear across paper. He once drew me a picture of a rocket ship blasting off from our front yard, surrounded by suns with smiley faces. He'd called me the fuel, said, "You make it all go." I'd cried in the kitchen after he gave it to me. He thought I was mad. I told him I wasn't, but I didn't know how to explain the ache of being needed, being seen. That picture had lived on our fridge for 5 years. I don't remember when I took it down. A nurse walked past, clipboard in hand. Her shoes squeaked. The clock above the check-in desk ticked slightly off rhythm, like it was losing time. A stack of magazines sat fanned out on a low table nearby, old issues of Better Homes, Reader's Digest, and one from last winter with a gingerbread house on the cover. I picked it up. I didn't read it. I just needed something to hold. The door behind the reception desk opened. Janine, the same nurse who had drawn my blood earlier, stepped out and called another patient's name. She spotted me sitting in the corner and gave me a small, genuine smile as she passed. I didn't return it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. She returned a few minutes later, slower this time, her footsteps softer. I felt her pause behind my chair. "You okay waiting out here?" she asked gently. I looked up. Her eyes were clear, kind, with a kind of practiced patience that only came from experience. I nodded. "I'm fine." She hesitated. "You got family waiting on you?" The question wasn't loaded. It wasn't even curious, just casual, but it hit something hard. "Not exactly," I said. She gave a little hum. "Sometimes it's better that way." I said nothing. She didn't push. She walked away. Behind the desk, I noticed a screen flicker on. A nurse, different this time, clicked through a scheduling portal, updating records. I wasn't supposed to be able to see it, but the angle of the screen was wide enough to catch a sliver. I saw my name, Whitmore, Eleanor M. underneath, the tag, Billing Party, removed. The next entry showed, Responsible Party, Gavin Whitmore, removed on March 28th. The date matched this morning. I looked away, not because I didn't believe it, but because it only confirmed what I already knew. My care was no longer part of his plan. He had signed up for duty when it made him look good. Now that it demanded more than signatures, he'd withdrawn, without even telling me. I sat very still. My coat slipped further off the chair. The receptionist glanced my way and said nothing. On the television, someone won a trip to Cancun. The audience clapped in silence. Across from me, the twins were now fighting over a blue crayon. The mother looked exhausted but amused, gently separating them, with the ease of someone used to chaos. I watched them for a while, watched how quickly the fight passed, how fast the laughter returned. I tried to remember the last time Gavin laughed like that, freely, without calculation, without concern for perception or money or strategy. The truth was, I couldn't. I remembered a time when he used to wait at the end of the driveway for me to come home. He'd wave both arms, yelling, "Mama!" like I was the best part of his day. Now he budgeted me. The screen behind the desk changed again. My name disappeared. I stared at the now blank monitor, the cursor blinking like it had nothing more to say. When the receptionist called my name again, I stood. My knees cracked a little. I picked up the coat and slung it over my shoulder, not bothering to shake off the dust. I didn't say goodbye, not to the room, not to the screen. I simply walked out. Outside, the air smelled like traffic and wet pavement. A car alarm blared from the parking lot. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The city moved, uncaring. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the bus stop, not because I had nowhere to go, but because I had somewhere to start. The house never echoed, not once in all the years we lived in it. You'd think a place that size, with its high ceilings, marble floors, long hallways, would hum with life. But it didn't. It absorbed sound the way it absorbed warmth, without notice, without return. Raymond had picked the house, of course. I was 23, barely out of college, still unsure how to measure happiness that didn't arrive in fairy tales or promises. He was already established then, confident, calculating, always dressed in blue-gray suits and cologne that smelled like distance. He said the house was an investment. He meant control. We moved in during spring. The yard was raw dirt and new grass seed. I remember standing at the bay window, imagining a swing set, maybe a dog. I told him I could already see children playing outside. He smiled faintly and said, "Don't make it too cluttered." Raymond wasn't unkind, not in the ways people warn you about. He never yelled, never struck a wall or threw a glass. He believed in composure, in dignity, but he withheld affection like it was currency. And he made sure I knew the price of everything I did. He praised when I followed instructions. When I changed out of a dress he deemed too loud. When I let him review the guest list for dinner parties. When I corrected my tone before he had to ask. And when I didn't, when I asked too many questions or disagreed in front of someone, he fell quiet. Not just for minutes, sometimes days. He would sit at the dining table reading the newspaper and I would serve him breakfast without a word. Silence became our most intimate ritual. That table became our centerpiece, not just of the room, but of the life we lived around it. Immaculately polished, it held candle holders we never used, place settings that never saw meals. It wasn't for nourishment, it was for decisions, for lessons. When Gavin was 10, he asked why we never ate there. Raymond folded his paper and said, "That table is where adults make plans, son, not where they spill orange juice." He laughed afterward, and Gavin laughed too. I didn't. Years later, Gavin stood at that same table while Raymond taught him to balance accounts, review mortgage options, draft budgets. When Gavin brought Clara over the first time, she admired it. "So elegant," she said. "It feels like it belongs in a movie." Raymond beamed. "It's where men learn how to build." I nodded politely. Clara had the kind of charm you didn't see coming. A smile like a straight line, eyes that knew when to look away. She never argued with Raymond. She never corrected Gavin. She adapted beautifully. She was what I had once been. At dinner that night, Raymond leaned toward Gavin and said, "You've chosen wisely. Just don't let your wife cost you." I remember the exact bite of chicken I was chewing when he said it. Dry, bland, swallowed without tasting. Gavin nodded, as if that advice had been inherited. After Raymond died, I stayed in the house. Not because I loved it, but because I didn't know where else I existed. The rooms were filled with echoes of the woman I had been trained to be. Quiet, useful, decorative. I used to think I had been strong, for staying, for adjusting. My mother had called that resilience. She'd once told me, while ironing napkins for a family gathering, a woman's strength is how much she swallows. I didn't argue then, but I do now. Because strength isn't swallowing, it's knowing when you're choking. One afternoon, not long after the consultation, I was cleaning out the hutch when I found Raymond's old flip phone, tucked in the back of a drawer, behind spare charger cords and a dead battery pack. I almost threw it away, but something stopped me. I plugged it in. There was only one saved voicemail, from 6 years ago. His voice was calm, deliberate, a little slower than usual. "Gavin, if anything ever happens, make sure your mother doesn't outlive her purpose. She's sentimental. It'll get expensive." I played it twice. The first time I didn't believe what I heard. The second time, I didn't question it. There was no anger in his tone, just the certainty of a man making arrangements. I deleted the message. Then I stood in front of that dining table, the one that had never held a real meal, and ran my hand along the edge. There was a small chip in the corner, a flaw I had always polished around. I didn't want to polish anymore. That night, I didn't eat dinner at the kitchen counter like usual. I set a place at the big table, just one. I lit the candles. I poured wine. I ate roast chicken seasoned the way I liked it. I even spilled a little sauce on the runner, and I left it there. The house didn't echo, but that night it didn't feel silent either. The envelope was heavy, not in weight, but in finality. It had arrived earlier that morning, delivered by certified mail. I'd left it unopened on the hall table while I made tea, watered the plants, fed the cat. All morning, I moved around it like it was radioactive. I could feel its contents, even without opening it. Sharp, clinical words dressed in polite legal language. Raymond always liked things done by the book. I finally sat down in the living room with the curtains drawn halfway. The light filtered through soft and fractured, casting angled lines across the rug. I opened the envelope, last will and testament of Raymond Ellis Whitmore, typed, bound, neat. I flipped past the declarations, the boilerplate. My name appeared once, listed as spouse. But the allocations? They all went to Gavin, the trust, the stocks, the estate, the retirement accounts. To my son, in recognition of his long-term fiscal stewardship. I received a monthly allowance, fixed, unadjusted for inflation. No rights to sell or leverage property. No co-ownership listed. I was to remain in the home as long as I maintained good health and fiscal responsibility. If I remarried or ceased independent living, the allowance would end. I sat back against the couch, the pages still open in my lap. No rage came, only a slow, burning calm, like realization passed down from marrow. This wasn't oversight. This was design. I had been planned out of the future like a faded rug. I folded the documents carefully and placed them back into the envelope. Then I looked up at the fireplace. The portrait above it had tilted again, just slightly to the left. It had done that before, whenever the house shifted with the seasons. I used to fix it right away, worried it might fall or crack. This time, I didn't move, let it hang crooked. It was more honest that way. I walked upstairs to the bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand, and pulled out the last anniversary card Raymond ever gave me. It had been generic, floral, pre-written sentiment, unsigned. No personal message, not even his name. He'd handed it to me in passing, saying, "You know I'm not good at these." I kept it anyway. But now, I carried it to the fireplace, struck a match, and fed the card into the flames. The paper curled quickly, blackened edges twisting like leaves in autumn. I watched it burn to ash. The doorbell rang 30 minutes later. It was Gavin, holding another file folder. He didn't step inside. "I figured I'd drop off the title records and tax filings," he said. "You'll need to start handling them directly. It's easier for the accountants if I'm out of the equation." He was already turning to leave when I asked, "Is that how you think of it now? That this is just easier for you?" He stopped. "It's not personal, Mom, you know that. I just can't keep absorbing a financial obligation like this, especially not with Nicole and I preparing to build." A financial obligation, I repeated. That's what you call your mother. Gavin's jaw tightened. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. He didn't argue, just shifted the folder in his hand, then offered it out. I took it, but not gently. As he turned away, I said, Then maybe it's time I cost you something. He didn't look back. I closed the door quietly and carried the folder into the study. Inside were the usual documents: utilities, tax prep outlines, a printout of the estate's expense forecasting. But there was also a property summary, and there, buried 2/3 of the way down, was something that didn't sit right: the cabin. I hadn't thought about it in years. Raymond had bought it in Vermont, said it was for retirement, but we rarely went. He claimed upkeep was expensive and the road access unreliable. I assumed it had been sold long ago, but here it was, still listed, under the name Gavin E. Whitmore. Only the original deed told another story. My name. Co-owner. The transfer had occurred 6 years ago. Quietly, no notification, no paperwork I'd ever signed, and no reason to suspect until now. I leaned back in the study chair, hands gripping the folder. There had been a time when Raymond took pride in hiding things in plain sight. And now, even from beyond the grave, he was still tidying the board, grooming his legacy, grooming my exit. I closed the folder slowly. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't feel the chill, not anymore. I found the flyer tucked beneath a stack of discharge papers near the hospital exit. Wellness After Loss, an open forum for growth, community, and resilience. It was printed in soft blues and greens, with a photo of a forest clearing that felt more like wishful thinking than invitation. I took it anyway, not because I believed in it, but because I needed something to hold on to that wasn't a folder full of legal betrayal. The next Thursday I showed up. It was in room 6, buried in the outpatient wing. The sign on the door read, Support Circle, but no one called it that out loud. Everyone who entered did so carefully, like stepping onto thin ice. No one introduced themselves at first. They just nodded, found a seat, clutched their styrofoam cups of hospital coffee. I picked a chair near the window. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in slivers of morning sun. Dust floated in the beams, undisturbed. The facilitator was a woman named Anya, warm but detached, like she'd been doing this too long. After a few vague opening remarks about growth and letting go, the room turned quiet. And then the woman across from me spoke. I'm Maggie, she said. I'm not grieving the dead. I'm grieving the silence I lived in for 40 years. Heads nodded. The room tilted toward her voice. Maggie was in her 70s, with thick white hair pulled into a loose braid and a cardigan that didn't match her shoes. She didn't sit like someone fragile. She sat like someone who'd fought for her seat. After the session, I lingered by the door. So did she. You're new, she said. I nodded. Not to grief. She laughed, not unkindly. No one is. We walked down the hallway slowly, past walls filled with posters about diabetes prevention and post-op physical therapy. What brought you in? She asked. I paused. A son who speaks like a man I buried. She stopped, looked at me like she was inspecting a map. Men like your son, she said finally, aren't raised. They're trained, like dogs or soldiers, with rewards for obedience and silence for deviation. I hadn't expected it, the sharpness, the clarity. It felt like standing in a cold room and someone finally pulling the curtain back. We sat on a bench by the vending machines. My son said I wasn't worth spending on, I said, voice flat. That my care was a waste. Maggie didn't flinch. He didn't come up with that on his own. No, I agreed. He learned it at the table we never used for dinner. She nodded slowly. He talks like his father did, I said. Right around the time he stopped loving me. Same tone, same measured patience, as if I've become a thing they regret not being able to return. We sat in silence. I don't cry about it, I added. I'm just tired of the quiet. That's not nothing, Maggie said. It's the start of everything. That night, I opened the old notebook again, the one I'd scribbled in after Gavin's consult. This time, I didn't stop after one line. I wrote about the dinner party where Raymond had cut me off mid-sentence to correct my interpretation of the facts. I wrote about the way Gavin had started mimicking him at 14, adjusting his tie and speaking to his friends like subordinates. I wrote about the day Clara told me, with a soft, pitying smile, You're lucky Raymond gave you structure. Most men just leave. I wrote until my hand ached. Then I closed the notebook and placed it on the nightstand without guilt. The next morning, I walked to the corner market and bought flowers, pink tulips. Raymond used to say fresh flowers were an unnecessary indulgence. I arranged them in a chipped ceramic vase from my first apartment, one I'd kept buried in a cabinet because he said it looked college level. I placed them on the kitchen counter and watched the way the morning sun hit their petals. They didn't apologize for blooming. Neither would I. A few days later, I received a letter. Not an email, not a bill, an actual letter. The return address was typed, not handwritten. Samantha Krell. I hadn't heard that name in years. Samantha had been Raymond's executive assistant for over 2 decades. Sharp, precise, discreet. She had coordinated every flight, every meeting, every anniversary gift he claimed to pick himself. I opened the envelope carefully. The letter was brief. Eleanor, there are things Raymond never intended for you to see, but some of us reach a point where omission becomes complicity. He had what he called a Plan B asset. Titled separately, funded quietly, not in any will, not in any shared account. He said if anything ever happened to you, it would cleanly revert. I thought you should know it exists. I no longer work for the firm, but I kept a record. If you're ready to ask questions, I'm ready to answer them. Samantha. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and slipped it into the back of my journal. I wasn't sure what Plan B meant, but I was suddenly very sure that Raymond had planned for everything. Except me waking up. The office was in a converted house on the quieter side of town, tucked between a boutique consignment shop and a dentist's office with a faded tooth logo. The sign out front read, Derek Shaw, Estate Law and Advocacy, small, brass, discreet, not flashy, not aggressive. But the moment I stepped through the door, I knew he was the right kind of dangerous. The receptionist offered tea, which I declined. My hands were already full. Journal in my bag, Samantha's letter in my coat pocket, a resolve I hadn't known I'd packed. Derek Shaw was in his early 40s, with graying temples and a calm gaze that made you feel like you hadn't wasted his time just by existing. He shook my hand like it meant something. I've reviewed the documents you sent ahead, he said, gesturing for me to sit across from his desk. And I've read the letter from Miss Krell twice. Once as a lawyer. Once as a man with a mother. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged both sides of my life in the same breath. He leaned forward. Let me be blunt. You're not just grieving. You're being erased. And that's not accidental. I nodded. He planned for every angle. But not for you waking up, Derek added, echoing the thought I'd scribbled in my journal 2 nights ago. Not for this. He slid a folder toward me. Inside were highlighted printouts, bank statements, obscure investment portfolios, land titles. Most were in names I didn't recognize, shell companies, sub-accounts. Raymond hid things, he said, common with men like him. What's uncommon is that he did so using your maiden name as a firewall. I blinked. What? Lucille Whitmore, Midwestern spelling, registered on multiple documents connected to a holdings group in Connecticut. Quiet, consistent deposits. Nothing fancy. Just enough to ensure a fallback. I stared at the documents. He used my name to protect himself. Or to appease his guilt. Derek didn't say it like it excused anything, just like it explained something fundamental. I studied the spreadsheet. Each transaction was small, every dollar accounted for. He never used it, I murmured. No, but he built it anyway. That means he was preparing for the possibility of abandoning you while pretending he wasn't. This wasn't just omission, it was structural. A pause. And now, his son's trying to do what he started. I looked up sharply. Gavin? Derek nodded. I received a call this morning from a colleague who works probate defense. He said Gavin's consulting another firm to question your legal capacity, mental fitness evaluations, guardianship suggestions, soft inquiries, for now. My blood ran cold. He's trying to disqualify me? Silently, yes. The room went still. I didn't speak, didn't breathe, just sat with the weight of it pressing into my chest. Then I straightened my back. I've been many things, I said evenly. Tolerant, gracious, tired, but irrelevant isn't one of them. Derek nodded slowly. Good. Because you don't just have a case, you have leverage. He pulled out another folder. Here's what we do. We initiate a counterclaim, not aggressive, just enough to stall his inquiry and put pressure on any redistribution of assets. We'll present the original co-ownership deed to the Vermont cabin. Then we start tracing transfers that legally require your notification. Once we establish even one procedural fault, the rest opens up. I looked at the pen he handed me. It didn't shake in my grip. I signed my name. Eleanor M. Whitmore, not Lucille, not Mrs. Raymond, just me. The signature felt cleaner than it had in years. As I stood to leave, Derek added, "One more thing." He handed me a padded envelope. Plain. Postmarked 3 days ago. It arrived at the office with no return address, but the handwriting matches Krell's file notes. I opened it carefully. Inside was a brass key, numbered, and a folded note. Safe deposit box, branch code 017. He was never going to choose you, Eleanor. But he feared you. That's why he hid the insurance clause. No signature. I stared at the key, cold and small in my palm. "Do you know what it unlocks?" I asked quietly. Derek shook his head. "But I know where to find out." The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. Not a storm, not a downpour, just a steady curtain-thin drizzle that blurred windshields and soaked the sidewalks. It mirrored my mood with uncanny precision. Quiet, deliberate, relentless. I parked across the street from the bank, the windshield wipers squeaking rhythmically. The key in my coat pocket pressed against my side like a whisper I couldn't yet interpret. I stared at the building for a long time before getting out. Red brick, white trim, the kind of place that had held secrets long before mine ever arrived. Inside, the carpet smelled faintly of mildew and lemon polish. The teller asked for identification and authorization. I handed her both without speaking. She nodded, polite but uninterested, and led me down a hallway lined with old photographs of past presidents of the bank, all white-haired and stiff-backed. The vault was colder than I expected. She pulled the box, 017, from the wall and placed it on a narrow table. "Take your time," she said, and left me alone. The box wasn't heavy, just deceptive. The lid creaked as I opened it. Inside, 2 stacks of documents, rubber-banded and carefully arranged, no dust, no disorder. On the top was a letter, sealed in an envelope addressed in Raymond's handwriting. It read, "To be opened only by Eleanor M. Whitmore." I opened it with hands that barely trembled. If you're reading this, it means the things I set in motion are finally catching up. There are things I could never say to your face. Not because I didn't want to, because I wasn't made to. My father taught me power isn't something you share, it's something you maintain. You, Eleanor, were always stronger than you knew. And that terrified me. What's in this box won't make up for anything, but it might explain some of it. The rest of the page was blank. I set it aside. Below were 2 folders. One was labeled personal, the other financial. I opened the personal one first. Inside were letters, not to me, to someone named Claire. The first was dated 21 years ago. Claire, I keep thinking I'll find the right time to tell her. But Eleanor is steady. She's woven herself into the life I built. I don't love her the way I love you. But she's been loyal. That has to mean something. The next letter was angrier. She knows something's wrong. I can see it in how she watches me at dinner. She's silent, but her silence is intelligent, not passive. I can't let her ruin this. I stopped reading. I could feel bile rising in my throat. Not from the betrayal. I had suspected there'd been another woman. Not from the cowardice. I'd learned to expect that from Raymond. But from the fear in his words. He had feared me, even when I was quiet, especially then. Below the letters was a small photo of a woman in her 30s, smiling at the camera from the deck of a sailboat. Her arm curled around a toddler. The child had Raymond's eyes. I closed the folder. I opened the second one, financial. Inside were checkbooks, 5, each bearing my full maiden name, Eleanor Margaret Whitmore, each linked to individual savings accounts, modest but real, untouched. Next to them was a printout. Total balance across all accounts, $342,011.74. At the bottom of the page, Raymond had scribbled in the margin, "She deserves at least half of everything, but I couldn't give it to her in the light." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I looked again at the checkbooks. Each one signed only once, his scrawl careful but unmistakable. The power he hoarded, quietly redirected under the guise of protection. He hadn't done it out of guilt. He had done it because part of him knew the empire would crumble if I ever decided to stop playing the part. Beneath the checkbooks was one last document, a land deed. At first, it looked ordinary, but when I scanned the registration number and parcel ID, my breath hitched. It was the land Gavin and Nicole were building their dream house on, their future. The deed had been transferred back to my name 23 years ago, never updated, never revoked, and still legally mine. I closed the box carefully, left everything as it was, everything except the first checkbook, which I tucked into my bag. The ride home was quiet. Rain still fell against the windshield, but inside the car, it was louder. I pulled over 2 blocks from the house and parked by an empty lot where wildflowers had overtaken what must have once been manicured grass. And I sobbed, not from grief, from release. Then I laughed, sharp and sudden. He was scared of me, I whispered, even when I was small. The words felt true. They felt earned. Back home, I opened the checkbook. I called the hospital billing office, and I paid for my surgery. In full. Under my name, no son, no signatures, no permission. Just Eleanor. The envelope never came. No phone call, no text, no Evite masked as formality. Just silence. I found out the way women always do, through whispers. Through a neighbor, through a florist order seen on the town square receipt board, through the quiet thrum of gossip that carries louder than any invitation ever could. Gavin and Nicole were throwing a pre-construction gathering, not quite a party, not quite a groundbreaking, just something to celebrate the next chapter, as one woman from the club phrased it. Their house, their future, was being built on the parcel of land I now knew was still mine. But they didn't know that, not yet. On a gray Saturday morning, I drove out past Sycamore Road, where the trees arched over like old cathedral rafters, and the dirt had only just begun to split for pipes and trenches. Construction tape flapped in the breeze. A handful of cars lined the gravel shoulder. I parked down the road, far enough not to be seen, close enough to see clearly. The gathering was already underway. White wine in plastic cups, fold-out tables dressed with pale linens, Nicole in sunglasses and a cream trench coat, greeting people like she was auditioning for something she already believed she deserved, and Gavin, standing tall, confident, gesturing to a stack of blueprints like he was unveiling a monument. They were beaming. I didn't move from my car. Instead, I looked out at the perimeter of the property, and there it was, the old boundary stone. A relic Raymond had insisted be engraved when he first purchased the lot, an aesthetic nod to legacy. It bore the letters R and E. Whitmore, 1999. My name, still there. I whispered to the windshield, voice low but steady. You built your future on stolen land. Let's see how sturdy it stands. I didn't stay long. I drove straight to Derek Shaw's office. He was reviewing another case when I walked in, but he didn't ask why I was there. He simply stood, set the files aside, and asked, "Are you ready?" "I want it back," I said. Within 48 hours, I was sitting across from a local real estate agent, sharp blazer, smarter eyes. She listened, nodded, asked for documentation. I provided everything, every deed, every transfer record, every signature that proved it had never really left me, and she said, "You've got options, quiet ones, loud ones. We can sell the lot. We can lean it. We can wait." "I don't want noise," I said. "I want clarity." As we finalized the paperwork, a memory snuck in, uninvited but vivid. Gavin's 5th birthday. I had baked the cake myself, dinosaur-shaped, chocolate layers, homemade frosting, tiny candles shaped like trees. I spent 6 hours decorating, 4 hours cleaning, and 2 hours watching as Raymond gave a toast that mentioned nothing I had done. Gavin smiled at his father, hugged his aunt, took the gifts. But when the cake came out and everyone clapped, no one said, "She made this." I had smiled through it. That night, I cried in the pantry, holding a paper plate with a single uneaten slice. Some debts go unpaid, some memories sharpen, not fade. When I got home, I went into the study, the one Raymond once called his command center, and pulled the blueprint off the wall, the one he'd had framed after purchasing the parcel. It showed elevations, trees, soil composition. It also showed my name. At the bottom, in tiny print, title holder E.M. Whitmore. I tore it straight down the middle, let the pieces fall like leaves. No anger, just motion. That evening, Derek called. "I've filed the reclaim," he said. "They'll be notified by certified mail in 72 hours. You'll have control of the property within the week." I thanked him. Then I checked the bank app tied to one of the quiet accounts Raymond left in my name. I hadn't touched it since paying for the surgery, but something had changed. A notification blinked on screen. Suspicious activity on shared account. Accessed by North Whitmore, Nicole. She had found a way in. She was moving money, fast. I called the bank, verified my authority, and froze the account. All of it. Every dollar. The power of silence isn't in staying quiet. It's in waiting for the right moment to speak. And I had just begun. The knock wasn't angry, but it was deliberate. Rhythmic. Like someone reminding the door it owed them something. I opened it to find Gavin on the porch, his shoulders tense, suit jacket askew like he'd left another meeting mid-argument. Behind him, the clouds gathered but didn't break. He didn't ask to come in. "I want to know what you think you're doing," he said. I stepped aside. "Come in or don't, either way I'm not playing defense." He entered, jaw clenched, eyes scanning the living room like it was enemy territory. "You froze our funds. They weren't yours. You filed against the land. You're putting a lien on our house. It's not your house." He stared at me, incredulous. "This is sabotage," he said. "You're sabotaging your family." I folded my arms, stood still. "No," I said. "I'm just no longer financing my erasure." His mouth opened, closed. Words failed him. "Everything we're building," he started. "Everything I've done was done without me," I cut in. "With me as a silent beneficiary at best, a disposable detail at worst. You decided my worth, then tried to edit me out. That's not true." I walked to the fireplace. The portrait was still gone, the space above the mantel empty, clean. "Do you know what it's like to raise a child who slowly stops seeing you?" He didn't answer. "I do." He shifted. "You could have said something. You could have asked for more." "I did. For years. You just learned not to hear it." Silence stretched. Then his tone hardened. "Nicole's devastated. She said you're trying to ruin us." "She would." Gavin stepped forward. "Why now? Why this way?" I met his gaze. "Because survival isn't legacy, and I've had enough of surviving quietly." He turned, jaw set, and walked out. No hug, no parting word. Just the sound of his shoes retreating down the walkway, fast, clipped, furious. I closed the door, locked it, then sat down at the kitchen table and cried into my hands. Not for what I had done, but for what I had lost long before this moment. The tears weren't loud, just steady. Later that afternoon, Maggie came by. She didn't knock. She just appeared in the doorway, holding 2 coffees and a bag of lemon scones. "I figured you'd need carbs and caffeine." I laughed through the remnants of grief. "You're getting good at my rhythms." She sat across from me. "They always come angry when you stop feeding their story," she said. "I wasn't ready for how much it would hurt." "Truth's like that," she said. "But so is freedom." I nodded, eyes drifting toward the hallway. Toward the box I hadn't touched since the deposit box discovery. After she left, I pulled it out. Inside was a photo, me and Gavin. He couldn't have been more than 7, his head resting on my shoulder, my arms around him, gentle. We were in the backyard, sun behind us, unaware of the camera. I stared at it until my hands trembled. Then I reframed it, carefully, deliberately. But instead of placing it back on the shelf, I slid it into the top drawer of my desk. Not discarded, just moved. From pedestal to record, a part of me, not all of me. The next morning, I made the appointment. At the county clerk's office, I filled out the paperwork with steady hands. Name change request, Eleanor Margaret Whitmore. The clerk asked, "Going back to something?" "No," I said. "Going forward to someone." She smiled. "Congratulations." When I returned home, Derek's message was waiting. "Just confirmed. Gavin was served this morning. Not with a suit. With a lien, I smiled, not in victory, in resolution. I wasn't suing my family. I was selling what they thought they had inherited by entitlement and building something entirely my own. I didn't write it to be read aloud. I didn't write it to be forgiven. I wrote it because silence, even when purposeful, eventually starts to sound like guilt. The letter began simply, "Gavin, I'm not writing as your mother. I'm writing as the woman you stopped seeing when she no longer held the keys to your comfort." The pen moved steadily. No shaking, no second thoughts. You didn't betray me by becoming your father. You betrayed yourself by believing that was a promotion. The words weren't cruel. They were crafted like a confession made not in desperation, but in clarity. I didn't speak of the will or the land or the lawsuit. Those battles had already spoken for themselves. Instead, I wrote about him, about the boy he used to be. I remember your 5th birthday. The way you cried when the dinosaur cake started to melt. I told you it didn't matter. Cake is cake. But you said, it's ruined now. It's not what I wanted. You've carried that disappointment like a map ever since. And I kept trying to fix your directions, even after you stopped believing I knew the way. I paused, my hand hovering over the page, and added the line that had kept me awake for nights. I birthed a boy, the world made him a weapon, and I let it. I sealed the envelope, wrote his name in clean, even letters, no return address. I walked to the corner mailbox in the early morning before traffic woke up. The sky was still pink with uncertainty. The streetlights hadn't yet surrendered to daylight. I slipped the letter into the box. No hesitation. My hand didn't tremble. Then I walked home. Not because I was waiting for something, but because I was done waiting for anything. Gavin received it 2 days later. He opened it at his desk, surrounded by blueprints and corporate reports. His assistant said he looked pale halfway through, then quietly folded it and locked it in a drawer. That evening, Nicole found it. She was always more curious than cautious. She read it, word for word. When Gavin emerged from the shower, towel slung over his shoulder, she held the letter like evidence. "You'll lose everything if you don't listen to her," she said. He didn't argue. He didn't speak. The next week, my lawyer received a press call. The Rosewood Women's Fund had just received a substantial donation of Class C shares in a growing real estate firm, Whitmore and Ellis Development. The donor? Anonymous. The signature? A handwritten note inside the transfer envelope that read, "For the women we were told not to become." It made the business section, a quiet headline. But it traveled. People noticed. Gavin noticed. He didn't respond. But I saw his hands on the news footage, shaking slightly as he adjusted his tie at a ribbon-cutting event the next day. That was enough. I hadn't taken him down. I'd simply stopped holding him up. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday, early morning, cold sunlight streaming over the east wing of the hospital. I arrived alone. Not because I had no one, because I no longer mistook proximity for care. The nurse asked gently, "Is anyone coming to sit with you?" I smiled. "No one I need." They didn't press. The pre-op room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old plastic. I changed into the gown, signed the release forms, listened to the anesthesiologist explain what would happen, as if I hadn't read every word 3 times the night before. When the gurney rolled toward the OR, I closed my eyes. And I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. Recovery was slow, but not heavy. There was sunlight, soft and golden through the windows of the rehabilitation suite, a small stack of books I'd been saving, my journal, pages soft with ink, meals delivered without fuss, the silence no longer empty, just peaceful. Maggie came often. She brought puzzles, newspapers, the occasional contraband cup of real coffee. "This is your second act," she said once, fluffing my pillows with theatrical flair. "No, strike that. Third. The one where the audience finally realizes the protagonist has been holding the whole damn story the entire time." We laughed. And then came Callie. She was assigned as part of the volunteer rotation, young, maybe 23. Brown curls pulled into a low ponytail, 2 big cardigan sleeves, and eyes that didn't condescend. She read to me once during a particularly slow afternoon, an excerpt from a memoir class she was auditing at the community college. "You're a natural," I told her. She smiled. "You really think so?" "Don't ask permission to be talented, just right." She started staying longer, bringing not just books but questions, and one day she asked if I'd ever taught. "Not formally," I said. "Maybe it's time you did." When I left the hospital, I didn't return to the estate. I'd sold it already, quietly, deliberately. Instead, I moved into an apartment above a bookstore on Hanover Street. Small, sunlit, full of soft corners and slanted walls. The kind of place where time didn't rush. The mailbox read, "M. Whitmore #2C, no other name, no hyphen, no title, just mine." The Women's Center was on the edge of town, funded in part by the very stocks I'd donated. They asked if I wanted to volunteer. I said I wanted to teach. So they cleared a room, gave me a whiteboard, a key, a table. Every Thursday, women of all ages came to write. Their stories were messy, raw, unapologetic. "I'm not a writer," they often said. "You're a survivor," I told them. "That makes you a narrator." In week 6, a reporter came to sit in, wrote an article that went modestly viral in a local way. The headline read, "She wasn't disposable, she was dangerous." It made me laugh, the kind of laugh that heals things. One morning, after class, Callie lingered. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, her voice smaller than usual. "Of course. My mom," she said. "When I was little, she got out. An abusive relationship. It took everything she had. I didn't know the details until later." I nodded, gave her space. "She started over through a program at Rosewood. The nonprofit, the one I donated to, anonymously. She never knew who funded her re-entry scholarship, but it got her out, got us safe, and gave me a chance to grow up into this." She gestured to the room, to herself. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She smiled, eyes wet. "I just thought you should know. What you did, it didn't just help people, it helped me. I didn't know it then, but now I do." I reached for her hand. She squeezed it. Legacy doesn't ask for applause. It just asks to matter. And somehow, through a maze of grief and reckoning, mine had found a way to touch someone real, someone right in front of me. He asked to meet for lunch. The message came through Derek, not directly. Still buffered by old habits, by fear of what might be said if no one was standing in the middle. Derek asked if I wanted to ignore it. I didn't. Not out of curiosity, not out of longing, but because some chapters don't close until you underline the final line yourself. We met at a small cafe near the courthouse, a neutral space. He was already seated when I arrived. Suit immaculate, hair carefully styled, hands clasped so tightly they looked bloodless. He stood awkwardly. "Hi, Mom." I nodded and sat. No hugs, no smiles, just the shared air of two people standing on opposite sides of a burned bridge. He tried to start lightly, asked how the surgery went, told me Nicole was back in school for a certificate in nonprofit finance, said he was reflecting. I let him talk, watched him spin words like they might sew up wounds, and then he paused. "I was wrong," he said finally. "I know," I replied. "I didn't mean to." "You did," I said, voice even. "You meant every choice. That's what made them powerful." He blinked, swallowed. "I want us to move forward." I picked up my teacup, set it back down. "This isn't a healing," I said. "It's a warning." He frowned. "I don't understand." "I know," I said again. "You think I don't care. I think you cared more about what I gave you than who I was while giving it." The silence between us was wide, but it wasn't heavy. "I don't hate you, Gavin," I said, "but I've stopped saving seats in my life for people who only show up to rearrange the furniture." He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, smaller. He said, "I don't know how to fix this." And I stood. "You can't. That's the point." I left the cafe without looking back, my spine straighter than it had been in years. At home, the light through the window spilled golden across the desk. A check sat ready, made out to the center, triple my usual donation. Next to it, my journal, open, pen uncapped, the final words already written in thick, confident strokes. He taught me that I was a burden. I taught him what burdens do when they learn to carry themselves. I signed the check, closed the book, filed the chapter, and smiled. Because for decades, he'd said I wasn't worth the cost, and I had become the finest investment he ever lost. If her silence sounded like someone you know, or someone you were, this story was for you. Not every inheritance is money. Some are wounds, some warnings, and some women turn both into weapons of reclamation. Stick with us. The next voice you hear might be your own. Don't miss out. If you enjoy impactful and thought-provoking stories, be sure to subscribe for more inspiring content. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new video.